oh, learn a shortcut, please learn a shortcut.
You've got IT stamped on your forehead whether you like it or not for life.
That's not ambition. Ambition is not the desire to want something. Ambition has to be combined with actually doing something. What is your plan to go and do that?
Can you tell us about something that maybe hasn't panned out exactly as you hoped?
I decided it was a good idea to connect my IDE to the production database and run an integration test, which its first step was to delete the contents of the database.
Hiya, and welcome to the second episode of the CTO Lens with me, David Crawford. This is a podcast in partnership with London Tech Leaders for CTOs, CIOs, and anyone who's either already leading in technology or aspiring to step into that role. Each week, we'll share practical insights and takeaways you can put straight into action in your leadership journey. Before we dive into today's conversation, let me tell you a little about London Tech Leaders. We're a community of more than 2,000 senior technology leaders, and we love creating spaces where people can connect and learn. Through regular community events, executive dinners, and now our brand new Women Tech Leaders series. We also host our 2-day leadership summit at the end of every year, but I'll share more about that later in the pod. So today's guest has over 20 years of experience in technology and engineering leadership and is a founding member of Starling Bank. Having joined right at the beginning, he has been instrumental in building the bank's technology platform from the ground up and is now the Group CTO, overseeing the continued growth and scale of one of the UK's leading digital banks. With deep expertise in fintech innovation, engineering leadership, and delivering technology that challenges traditional banking, please welcome Steve Newson. Hi, Steve.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Steve?
I'm Steve Newson. I've been working for Starling Bank now for 10 years, I think it is. I was there pretty much right from the start. We were a very small team of around about 10 people at that point. There was, as is always the case when you're a startup at that kind of size, you kind of end up falling into some jack of all trades kind of roles. Certainly I was, we didn't really have any titles at that point, but I was very much an engineer. I've been a software engineer, a programmer, if you will, since I was very young, since I was 10. And that's really been the love of my life. My wife might question that one, that statement. But certainly that's the thing that I've always fallen back on. I enjoy technology in all its aspects. So I found myself at a company that was very much early doors, and I've grown through that company. I've taken various roles within there. I was a chief operating officer for a while, CTO obviously, and then I've moved into this group role as the organisation has become larger over time.
Excellent. And before that, how did you 10 years, that's a long time in a busy world, but what did you do before that and slightly after 10?
Okay. My first role, the first thing I did was working for they call themselves a consultancy at that point, but really it was very much a technology firm. So that's a small asset finance industry. So the product that they did was they built software for organizations. They also put people on site. So in order to help the implementation of that software, and also assist in those companies growing into the areas they wanted to use. I spent a considerable amount of time there working through various roles. So I started off really as a consultant, which involved a fair amount of programming as well as interacting with clients. That gave me a pretty good grounding in meeting people, interacting with people, learning what client demands are, what their needs are, doing presentations, all those things you need. It was actually a very good start, and I still stand by that as being a good thing for anyone to go through, even though it can be quite complex and quite time-consuming and stressful at times. It is a very good start to a career. So I started doing that. I then moved into a number of other organizations, doing things like working for the DWP for a while. I've worked for a company that was doing basically ran an FX platform for FX trading. So an assortment of different things. Some of those things very technical, some of those things more managerial, some of them more operational in nature. So I've kind of moved between a lot of different things, ending up basically at Starling.
You make the point about the different skill sets that you sort of were exposed to, I guess, and had to learn. We'll get into that when we talk a little bit further. I think, having all of those ingredients really help you to get into that CTO. And when you joined Starling, what stage was it at? How did you get involved? Was it a pub conversation with a mate? Did they recruit you? How did that work?
A long-term friend of mine, John, who I've worked with at numerous different companies, and I've known for 20 odd years. He and I had been spending a large amount of time considering where we were in our careers, what we wanted to do. And one of the things that I think both of us realized was we wanted to be in a position where we weren't being the product ourselves. So I think a lot of the time, one of the things that I'd found was I was trading off my skills. So I was trading off my technical skills, and there is a limit to the point at which you can do that. You have to get to a point where you realize that you're not going to be the fastest to do everything. Yes, you're going to have a huge amount of experience in there, but you're not going to be the fastest to code things. You're not going to be able to do all the new platforms, all the new technologies, everything else. Your capacity to be able to learn all these things, your time and ability is constrained. And the path to being more successful in some respects, but also the path to actually feeling like what you're doing is worthwhile and you're going to achieve something, is really to get involved in something and stop being that product and enabling that product to be something to be created. So we were both looking for things where we're going to say, yes, we can leverage our technical skills, but how do we get to a position where we are actually making something, that we're actually creating something? So we were looking for startups. We talked to a lot of different companies, and I met a number of different CEOs. Certainly around that time, there was a flurry of activity in the fintech, the neobanks, the challenger banks, as it were, all those kind of organizations that was coming around. And so we met a lot of them. We met CEOs, we met all manner of people where we went, okay, I'm not entirely sure I totally trust this person, because bear in mind, we have to feel you have to feel that there's a good relationship with that person or that team. When I met with, we eventually got through a mutual contact. We got in contact with Starling and knew that they were looking for technical team because of history gone past, but they didn't really have any technical function. They had a plan, they had a business plan, but they didn't have an implementation of that. So John and I met with Anne at that time, Anne Bowden. And it was pretty much at that point we realized that's what we wanted to do, and we had total confidence in Anne. We had confidence in her abilities. She was technical. She's technical in nature, albeit she's not a software developer anymore. So she understood fundamentally what we could bring to this, and also her goals were very much aligned to our goals on that. So that's how we ended up with Starling, and I think then we grew with that company going forward.
I think it's really interesting how you and John made the decision that you wanted to stop being the product yourself. Yeah. I think a lot of people will resonate with that, right? A lot of our listeners will be very talented individuals who are going, right, I'm good, I've done some great projects, what's the next thing for me? And to make that decision and go, it's got to stop being about just me and what I do and look for something. But what's interesting about your journey there is that you didn't have a product. You didn't go, oh, I've got an idea and I'm capable of doing it. You sort of went out searching. And it sounds like it was, a little bit of joining up there, a little bit of minds meeting, but you were looking for something, right? And putting yourself out there. And I think that in itself probably be quite scary for people, just having made that decision to then go and position yourself as I'm ready to help anybody build a product.
Yeah, I think there's an element of serendipity in there, obviously, but there's also you have to go out there and do those things. You have to go and be active and trying to be involved in it, and it's the luck aspect will definitely play into it. But also you have to be able to put a little bit of skin in that game. And I think I was very lucky. My wife was hugely supportive at that time. So she was pregnant with my twins.
Good timing.
At the time. So she watched at that point. We're looking very much for stability, and I'm going, what I'd like to do is I'd really like to mix this up and try something new. And we made an agreement that we were going to spend a amount of time doing this. That's what I wanted to do. I was totally laser focused on that, but we were going to time limit this to the whole thing. As it happened, that all worked out very well for me in the end. But certainly, that's a very risky decision to make, and that really differentiates what you have to find the right time to do that. You have to be in the right space and be prepared to give up a lot of your time, give up a lot of your energy and free time, really, to be able to devote to that project.
We'll talk more about that journey in a minute. So that's kind of how you got here, right? Let's just find out a little bit about your thinking right now. For all of our podcast guests, we have 10 quick-fire questions.
Okay.
They're not harmful or painful, but if you can Give us your off the cuff answer, just and then we'll see what the True Steve is all about, right?
Okay.
Okay. Early bird or night owl?
I am a early bird.
Okay. Cloud or on-prem?
Cloud, but shifting slightly, but cloud. Yes.
Okay. One app you can't live without on your phone?
I'm going to say Slack, sadly.
Okay. I was looking for Starling banking app, but never mind.
Well,
never mind.
Starling Bank, obviously, but I'm not using that every day.
No, that's true. A tech leader you admire, past or present?
That's a difficult one.
You wouldn't believe how many people just pause at that moment, because you can't say Steve Jobs or Bill Gates because everybody says Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that they. So I would be more of a kind of the Steve Wozniak end of that.
Right.
Thing,
okay.
right?
A little bit behind the scenes, not the jazz hands.
Yeah,
So
I don't. Yeah, it's not so much about the presentation; it's about the technicality of what's doing that. So I always think that was a.
Okay, that's good.
That goes back to my roots of being eminently an engineer, right? I just like cool tech.
Nothing wrong with that. Who owns tech in 2005? The CIO or the CTO?
I think the CTO.
Okay. You want to expand on that a bit?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think it's muddied a lot in a lot of organizations. I think I've always discussed it as being the CIO is the outward presentation of what the requirements. It's like they're collecting what needs to be done. They're talking about the direction of travel for the organization. The CTO is making a decision about how does it get implemented. CEO, what do we want? CTO, how are we going to build and deploy that?
Got it. Agile or waterfall?
Agile.
Obviously, that you nearly said obviously at the end of
Well,
that.
I'm going to say I'm going to caveat it a little bit,
Okay,
which is that, but not agile, not agile methodology, not agile.
Agile with a little a.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll take that.
I prefer the outcomes of agile rather than the rules.
Good clarification. Which tech conference is unmissable for you?
I always love QCon.
Oh, okay.
I love QCon, and I enjoy going to see the Amazon AWS reInvent. Is always a
lot of people like that one.
That one's always quite interesting. But QCon, I think you get a huge, certainly in London, you get a huge variety of content, everything from very technical stuff right the way through to slightly comedic. Dan North is always a huge draw in those things.
I'll look out for that next time. Yeah. Okay, AI, game changer or just another tool?
I'm going to say on the fence on that one. I think it can be a game changer, possibly just not in the way that it's being portrayed by the people peddling AI to you.
Okay, we're just waiting for that to settle a bit. I get that. If you weren't in tech, what would you be doing?
Basically, I'd be coding. That's all I'd be doing the whole time because that's pretty much what I love doing.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think it would be tech. It would be coding, but not for a company.
And given that, if you had to move anywhere in the world, where would you go?
California.
Okay.
I spent a fair amount of time in California in LA. My wife worked in LA, and so I genuinely loved being around there. It's an interesting area, but there's a lot of my most of my youth, perhaps. My recent youth.
Right. Yeah. I know what you mean.
I spent there, and I enjoyed it there. I always found California to be very.
Oh, that's great. I had a little dip into San Francisco for 2 or 3 years when I was at Naked Wines, and that's it's a slightly different dynamic on the West Coast, right?
Yeah. Well, I lived on the East Coast in Boston and Rhode Island for a while, so and they're different things again. So.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. We got to know you a little bit more, Steve.
Excellent.
Okay, let's get on with the main interview. So given that you joined Starling when it was a startup, and you were an engineer ostensibly, that's what you've told us, a technical hands-on guy. What's the journey of a CTO from startup to enterprise? And I'm imagining that there are people who think you have to leave, but in your case, it's grown from a startup to an enterprise effectively. So how did that journey go for you? And let's see if that's also my experience of startup to enterprise.
It's you never really know when you've become an enterprise. You can look back and go and say, "Oh, we are now," and we were, but that transition is not obvious. There's not a clear cut off right now we're an enterprise. You just see enterprise kind of creep in the thing, and it's essentially. it usually comes about because of the number of employees in the company. You get to a particular size and you can't be anything else. So that's a kind of very difficult way to kind of can't work out what it is. But it is very clear when you are a startup that the activities you're going through are just very different. People don't tend to. You tend to not fall into specific roles. You have your comfort zones, but you are forced by the sheer lack of resource around you to get involved in other things. So things that historically I would not have even considered being involved in, they always are at arm's length. Things like risk and compliance, right? Those bits that are often in banks that are kind of like, it's off to one side. There's a team.
There's a whole department.
There's a whole department doing that, policing the
and
other
you're
part.
looking around and there's nobody there, and you go, I've got to do that.
Exactly. Like who's gonna be like building a customer service systems, building out operations and the various other bits and pieces. You don't go, that's not my job. That's somebody else's job. In that startup, you go, I'm just going to have to roll my sleeves up and get involved. I'm going to have to answer that question. I'm going to have to get involved in it. I'm going to write that document.
Yeah.
And that was enlightening. It was enlightening for me, but it was also quite exciting to be able to do that. I also learned a huge amount in that time because it's areas which that are always kind of walled off from you when you get into a large enterprise. And that is really the big thing that shifts when you get into that enterprise, that you become much more isolated as a CTO and isolated in any of your roles from everyone else. You then interact through, to some degree, committees, but also meetings. There's a lot more organization in order to make that communication take place and make the whole beast operate efficiently. And they don't inherently operate efficiently. There's always going to be problems in it, but they do. But you have to put that routine. And the things that at the early days were like, we shouldn't have meetings, we shouldn't be doing presentations. It's like all this thing is really frustrating. It's just taking up our time. Some of those things become actually really important. Writing things down becomes important, whereas before it probably didn't. You also shift, your horizon shifts. Startup mentality is a very short horizon. You're not thinking about building a system that can scale to 3 million customers. You're building a system that can get you through the next week of what you need to do, right? And acknowledging where there's going to be some risks there, and you're going, I'm just going to take that risk. That thing is going to be a problem. There's a little fire over there. I'm going to ignore it, and I'm going to. When you get to enterprise, you're now thinking, all right, now I'm thinking about what's happening in a year, what's happening in 2 years, what is likely to be the CEO's next direction of travel, what is likely to be our investors' direction of travel, how are those going to be aligned, and how do we get into those?
We'll talk about CEOs and their crazy ideas in a second, right? Because I think that's important when you're in that startup mode as well.
I categorically am not going to say that any of my CEOs' ideas are crazy, just to be clear.
Okay, that's fine. We'll talk about a fictional CEO and a fictional company and see where that conversation goes. I think that, what you're describing there is similar experience, but a little bit like you, there was life before Starling, right? And in actual fact, I was in enterprises before I went into any startups, and I imagine you had some enterprise experience as well. Yeah. So you do know about those processes and those meetings and communication. Everybody goes, communication. Make it dynamic. You have to have structure in a large organization to do communication, right? So I think that's important. But let me ask you about, did you find it frustrating, given that you can move at speed, and as an engineer, you just want to do stuff, ship, deliver, try stuff out, play with stuff, see what works. In a startup way, as you had to put structure and meaning, and it naturally had process and then maybe a bit more consideration around it. Did you get frustrated by that? Were you like, come on, let's just do it? Or did you understand it? And were you okay with it?
In the enterprise, or do you mean?
From startup to enterprise, as you went on that journey.
Yeah, you go through phases of absolute, like, we used to be able to do this in a week. Why is it taking so long?
Right.
And the answer generally to that is you have to acknowledge that there are some bits, you have to bring some people along with that. When you are a small number of people, you can bring everybody in the room up to speed with that, or the relevant people into speed with it very quickly. Yeah. One of the benefits of me working with John at that first organization, when we first started, was he and I knew each other really well. I literally knew, if I write this piece of code, he is going to rip it apart because it's terrible. And likewise, he knew what I was going to say about various things. So we very quickly, you don't need to go through like that very simple thing, that review process as robustly, because you know you're doing, you know how you're talking about it. And that scales out across the entire organization. People just inherently trust what you're doing. You don't need to bring them along. When you get to that larger organization, you do need to bring people along. And that is where the frustration gets, because it's like, can you please just catch up with me? I'm there. You now need to be there.
But they weren't with you the day before when you were in the shower having the idea, right?
Yeah.
That's the key. So you really have to take the time to go, okay, I need to bring everybody on this journey. And we know from experience that engineers, designers, they all want to know the why, right? They want to know what's driving you. In terms of talking about roles, as the organization grows and as more process comes into place and maybe some project management and some financial tracking and all of those things, which we know a CTO has to be across, how did you change to become able to do? You said you learnt some things as you go, like, oh, I've got to write that document, I've got to do that. But how did you morph yourself to become that? Because we often hear that, actually the CTO for a startup is different from a CTO for a scale-up, is different from a CTO for an enterprise. But you've done all of those in one company. How did you have to morph yourself?
Talking to people and listening to people and not becoming totally focused on the tech. And that's the bit. My natural place would be to go, and I think that's the same for a lot of CTOs and a lot of technical people. They go, I want to go back to my happy place, which is dealing with the tech and solving technical problems. Technical problems have a good feedback loop for you, because you can go, here's a problem, I've got the solution, little kick. Right? You get that kind of endorphin, serotonin, or whatever. Right? You're getting that little kickback, and you're doing that repeatedly. The bigger problems don't have that, so you have to go and get involved in it, and you have to go through that frustration of not understanding what those problems are, and talking to people and getting their point of view. That is the skill you have to have. That's the skill you have to develop, is being prepared to listen to what people are asking you and what they need, and also taking a perspective. I take my risk and compliance bit as a good example of this. I had a very strong opinion about risk and compliance, as in I had a view of it, because my view of risk and compliance in any organisation has been, they're the people that say, no, you can't do that with it. Totally irrationally, it would appear. Like, why can't we do that? That just doesn't make any sense. And why are you putting roadblocks to us to achieving stuff? Because we were involved in that right from the very start. I had a much better understanding of why we are doing those things, what that team is providing, and what skills they are providing. But equally, that went the other way, which is like, I'm going to educate you about some of the things about the controls we put in place to prevent the things that you're worrying about, right?
And you learnt clearly to do those things, listening, working stuff out. You said earlier your true love is down in the code, right? Messing about with tech stuff. So did you ever at times feel like you didn't want to learn those? Did you ever at times think like, should we just bring in somebody who can do this and I'll stay down here with the tech team?
Yes, absolutely. There's been times within Starling particularly, that it's been incredibly stressful, and I've gone and I try to go back. And I think that I never did. And I mostly didn't because of the drive of the rest of the team. You're kind of being depended on by everyone around there, and to step back and expose other people to the same problems and leave them and go, so that's it, I'm out. You're kind of tapping out, and that was for me the thing that stopped me. But yes, absolutely, there was a lot of times where I thought to myself, I just give me back coding. In fact, if I think back prior to that, and I think about my career up until my first role I did, my first job I did, I reached a point where I was doing management. I was, leading teams of engineers, a relatively small team of engineers, but leading that. There was a lot of documentation. There was a lot of writing specs and all that kind of thing. It was of a time, basically. And the thing that I reached at that point was a point where I realized, I'm not enjoying this anymore. I'm not getting what I want out of it. And I stepped back and I looked for another role, and the role I took was highly technical. And I worked with the FX trading platform with a small group of engineers dealing with very, very, it's high frequency trading. It's low. It's all memory in. It's very close to the metal stuff.
Got it.
Fantastic. Really scratched that itch, right? That kind of, I want that technical thing. But I realized that like I say, that over time I was not going to get where I wanted to get. I was always going to be that. But that was definitely my first attempt at flicking back, and then.
Interesting that you did it though. You went to
I did.
scratch the itch, right? And I think that's useful to have that experience that you've done that. And I think, you know, if people have an itch, they should try it. I've moved about a little bit, and I now know where I like to be. And in actual fact, I like to be, despite being a card-carrying CTO, I like to be further away from the technology these days. I like to be in the business, facing into the challenges and problems of customers and internal stakeholders and all that kind of stuff, and then representing that with the technology team. And I think you just have to work that out over time. And sometimes you have to trial and error, right?
It's definitely what I'm doing, right? Yeah. Exactly what you described is what I'm doing. It's just that I've got this constant pull that's going, go back and do the coding.
Yeah.
Go and do this.
Little voice in your head.
Yeah,
pulling you back
it's like, this is your happy place. And it's true. It's like, I find coding incredibly relaxing. It's the thing that I sit there and I'll do. If I get a problem and I can totally immerse myself in that problem, that will consume me for hours while I sit there and try and solve that problem. But that for me is totally relaxing.
Okay, well, I don't want to take you out of your Zen-like state and trigger you here into a trauma, but let's talk about, let's call them a fictional CEO,
okay, yeah.
Or, you know, maybe some marketing people or some sales people, you know, very generic sort of people in a company who might come up with really, really interesting ideas.
Yeah.
That can be stressful for a CTO and their team. How do you face into that?
Usually what happens with those situations is people it's not so much, it's the expectation technology. AI is doing this a lot at the moment, right? Which is the outward presentation is that AI can solve everything. And people that don't fundamentally understand what is taking place with these, particularly with LLMs, can't differentiate between that and being genuinely it can do everything, right? It's like there's definitely some things it can't do. There's some things it does badly, and it will improve over time, I'm absolutely sure. But there's some things you can't replace with AI. But that typifies that kind of things like, well, we should do this. But also, because of that prevailing message, there's an acceptance that you can do everything faster, because that's what the marketing of AI is doing at the moment, is to say everything will be cheaper, faster, anyone can do it, you don't need expertise anymore. Isn't it great? So that is probably one of the things that's really pushing it right now. And the response generally is to go and try and educate those people about what's doing. But there is definitely an ongoing pressure and trying to explain what is involved in this. The other one that's always been the thing is like people see a demo and they immediately go, oh, that must be, you can put that live now in a couple of weeks. You're like, no, that's literally cobbled together.
Just send it to Chat GTP, the demo, send that and it'll be here.
I saw it working. Can you put it live now, please? And that is that's a hard to learn problem, right? That's one of those things where you get every organization gets this thing. It's like, if you're going to demo it, make sure that it's clear it's absolutely a demo and there is still a load of work to get that.
Make it break in the middle. That's what I'm good at doing, making it fail in the middle of the demo. Then people know it's not ready to go.
Do it on a live stream. You're guaranteed that it's not going to work at that point.
Exactly. Join a room full of like-minded technology leaders at the London Tech Leaders Summit on October the 7th and 8th. 2 days dedicated to real conversations about life at the top of the tech pyramid. You'll experience a packed agenda of hands-on workshops, thought-provoking panels and inspiring keynotes, all designed to help you grow as a technology leader and shape your leadership style for the future. Spots are limited, so don't wait. Register now via the link in our bio. And so in an organisation like Starling Bank, where you've grown up through it being a startup scale up, now a serious contender in the digital banking world. How much have you gone into, we talked about agile with a lowercase a, but how much have you and your team gone into full-blown product management and sort of, doing that whole process and wrapping all that around it? Or have you just you're doing your own thing?
It's ebbed and flowed over time.
Okay.
I think we're very much now in the direction of travel is having more producty people.
Okay.
We have gone through phases where there's been no product people, and that's largely about and then putting technology people in charge of just, right, you own this particular area. What do you want to do to innovate? It really helps that our staff are our own customers as well, so they know what they want to do, and so they can say, I would like to be able to do spending insights, right? I'd like to be able to understand where my money's going. Well, I can build that, and that is actually a really useful thing. If we were building something that they weren't consuming, that would be harder for technologists people to get behind that, I think. And having someone with a product mindset that is focused on that domain may well be a better thing to do.
I think that's true, depending on what your product is. I mean, I certainly felt that when we were at Naked Wines, pretty much everybody in the technology team was an alcoholic. So, that kind of helped, right? But I think, joke. Anyway, I think it does, when you can all get your head around what the product is, everybody can be a bit of a product manager, right? Yeah. And I think there is a trend that I'm starting to see, certainly, where product's not doing so well. It was a real big thing for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And now it feels in some organizations like they're saying, and maybe AI is going to help this more, devs, get a bit further left, get up the stack a little bit and start understanding what the business wants. Yeah. And then if you've got, because devs are all clever, right? So do they need somebody to translate it for them? I don't know. That seems to be a trend that I'm seeing.
We spent, my first piece of advice would be on this is always don't, as an engineer, and don't give up that responsibility. Don't push it away and say, that's not my thing.
Got it.
Because you're making it's a huge mistake, and what you'll end up being is in a situation where somebody else is dictating what the direction of travel is, and you no longer have control or understanding, and you're just getting requirements, and then your job will slowly over time turn to in-tray, out-tray work. It's the Jira, the Jira workflow, right? Oh, I've got a load of tickets, and then you've got your agile Scrum Master or whatever, you got your project manager, effectively your Jira admin sitting there going and saying, could you update your tickets? Can you do that? And then the job becomes more about, like I say, in-tray, out-tray work. You're not involved in the decision making. You've got some control about how that might be technically implemented, but you haven't got real control. You don't have real context around what that is, and it's probably coming. And you're really sitting it's a waterfall model taking place with a little bit of agile in the middle, and you've got control.
Pick up your ticket, deliver your ticket, go home. I mean, it's a boring life, right?
It is, and don't give that up. Product is one of the things so what should really be happening is, and what we did when John and I started building out teams in the organizations, we very much said is that we are a technology-led company. That doesn't mean that technology makes all the decisions. It just means that technology is involved in the decision making and understanding what it is, and that what we do is put engineers, software engineers, next to the teams, right, embedded in the teams that they're working at. And we aligned team structure broadly to, we didn't really have departments, but kind of functional areas, should we say. So customer service has a team that's just working on customer service, and their responsibility is to fully understand what customer services problems are on a daily basis, not have some intermediary business analyst or project manager or product manager pass them a list of requirements, but actually fundamentally get in there, look at what they're doing, sit next to those teams and understand why their problems are. And then more importantly, own their own prioritization. And that is, I think, fundamental. If you give somebody else, you give a project manager or a product manager or a Scrum Master or whatever, the ability to prioritize on your behalf, you're actually abdicating some responsibility. And that way, I think madness lies. And some of the most miserable times I've had is when it's just been just working on those tickets, get the tickets through, right?
And I think it's funny, but I think that's been a constant for the last 20 or 30 years, and yet we still find organizations who are operating in that way. And it's been proven time and time again. You get your engineers close to the product, you get them close to the customer, they'll do magic for you, right?
Well, and there's lots of it. There's things you won't be able to see from externally, but internally, the way that our customer service team is, they're going to say the problems we have are we're getting a lot of calls around this particular area, and we go, right, okay, well, how are we going to address that? Like, what is the root cause of that? A lot more, let's get the data. We've got a data team looking at the analytics behind it. We'll actually take that all the way through and understand how we might implement that. You get much more creative and innovative solutions when you understand what the tools are you have in hand to be able to solve that. If you put someone non-technical in there, they can be very good. So I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush, but it can be that person is only able to comprehend the tools that they have observed rather than what you can actually do. We own our own stack, so we have the whole thing end to end. There's very little that we outsource from a technology perspective. There's bits and pieces here and there and everywhere, but we try to basically say, buy it if there is a benefit to doing that right at the early day, like right at the start, as in we want a fast part of the market, but build it if it's something that you actually is core to your business. That means that we have a lot of flexibility, and a lot of people that come from larger organizations and big banks particularly aren't used to that. So they think in terms of I can't manipulate the system. It's too hard to change the system. There's too much lag to the whole thing. And what we should be doing is it's just easier to go and find the solutions that are less innovative, perhaps.
So I think we're knocking on the door of a question for a CTO, which is how technical do you need to be? Now, I don't need you to answer this question. You've established, we've established your technical credentials and your first love. Your wife will hopefully forgive you. But we've just described technologies getting closer to the product, closer to the customer, more involved. We talked about AI, and there's a lot of concern about, is AI going to replace engineers? And there's a lot of people saying, well, now the business people, the non-technical people, can use AI to do the stuff that the engineers are doing. And one or two of our podcast guests, we've talked about sort of merging it in the middle. But from a leadership perspective, do you think we're going to see non-technical CTOs coming along because, they use a bit of AI and a bit of product knowledge and that's it? We've got the CPTO, but still got T in it. How technical are these leaders going to need to be in the future?
I guess it really much depends on what the organization is delivering. If you're delivering something that is highly technical in nature, or your differentiator is the technology in what you're doing, I think you need to have someone that has someone senior leadership that's sitting at the table with everybody else when they're discussing the direction of travel of the company, talking about the technology and how that can grow and what it's capable of doing, but also having an outward innovative look at where can we go, what's our direction of travel, knowing that some of the big changes require a lot of time to deliver. You can't just flick a switch and we're good to go. I have to put some planning into that. I've got to put so we'd like a data warehouse, right? Okay, well that's going to require a significant amount of plumbing. We're now going to need to build everything into that. Like the how does that get through? How does that feed data and everything else? That's a long example of something you need to do. Having that technical understanding of what's involved in doing that is necessary. But that said, that doesn't mean you have to have a deep technical knowledge of every single thing that's out there. But you do need to have a technical mind. I think is probably the right thing.
And I think I agree with that. I've had conversations with people where they're like, no, a bit of AI, a bit of this, bit of that. You can learn a bit on the fly. I once programmed in HTML, I'm good to go. And you're like, oh, okay, right. I think it's the conversations that you need to have. One of the things I've experienced, I'm fractional at the moment, and I do 1 day a week for a very small startup. And so the engineers who are full-time just get on with it most of the time, right? And the thing that they come to me most for is not, shall I use that configuration or that configuration? Should we go with it? They come to me and they say, yeah, the CEO's sort of asking about can you explain to him that we need to do it?
Absolutely.
And so it's that translation layer that sometimes is just very useful. And I think actually the question shouldn't be, does the CTO need to be technical? I think it's, does the CTO need to be business savvy?
Yeah.
And that's the way to turn it around, because the answer to that has to be a screaming yes, doesn't it?
Absolutely, you definitely have to be, and you also have to be aware of the politics that's taking place in it. You can't live in a little silo where you're not involved in that. You reminded me of one of my early managers, who I would describe him as relatively technical, but not particularly technical in an organization. And one of the things he was discussing was, he was saying, well, we were talking about estimates. Talking about, well, I need you to be able to estimate how long is this going to take to build this thing, right? So I was obviously front and center at that point, building some software or whatever. And it's like, well, I don't really know. It's like, well, his point was, it's just widgets, right? So you need to know which widgets you're going to use to put together, and you know how long it takes to build that type of widget and how long it takes to that. You add that all up, and that's it. So I think the perception at that point, and it was a huge frustration for me at the time, is like that you've written software before, therefore all the software you build in the future, you can just use that as your baseline for the same thing, as opposed to every problem is a new problem. And that, I think that's the level, for me, was always the level at that stage, was a real frustration between working for someone, and this is the bigger thing, is working for someone who is non-technical can be incredibly frustrating for an engineer, because they have a tendency to trivialize what they're doing, or not trivialize, but not really understand what's going on, and that can actually be really irritating as an engineer. So I think it's really you don't have to be technical. Again, you don't have to be technical, but you need to recognize there's going to be people beneath you in the organizational structure that need you to understand what they're doing. They need to fundamentally understand what they're doing.
And I completely agree with that. And I think, there's lots of people who say engineers want to be run by somebody who understands them, right? So I think that's okay. I think most CTOs would agree with you. You touched on a point there which kind of bugs me, and I'm challenging our CEOs and our COOs of the world on this, right? The people who go, I'm not technical, I don't understand the technology, and then you say, right, okay, have you got a mobile phone? Do you do online banking? There's your default, and do you use Netflix? And and suddenly you're using digital technology, and you kind of start to pick up on some of these terms. Now, I'm not asking you to reformat a database and do some ETL to get the data. I'm not asking you that question, right? But I want to challenge the people who say they're non-technical and say, look, if you want me to be business savvy, you got to just listen a bit and actually try and understand. And I think the job of the CTO at that point is to really break it down into terms that are non-technical. And there's plenty of analogies in life that you can use for that. I love a good analogy. But I think that they need to say, yeah, okay, I'm going to try and understand this. Do you find that? Is that something that you care about? Is that something that you come across?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to be very careful when you go down that route that you don't end up being the IT guy.
Yeah, that's true.
And that it's like, oh, my phone doesn't work, so could you fix my phone? Or the screens aren't working in this room, so could you crawl around on the desk and plug in the right things? Because as soon as you're
never going to get rid of that, Steve. Just stop
you can't
hoping
get rid of
it's going to go. You've got IT stamped on your forehead, whether you like it or not, for life.
But one piece of advice that I had from one of the many pieces of advice I had from a former CEO was that you as soon as you start crawling around on the floor underneath the desk, all credibility has been lost at that point. And you need to recognize, but you also need to recognize that, well, what is the way in which that gets fixed? How do you make sure that happens, and how do you enable that person to go to the right person rather than it being you doing that, solving that problem? But I definitely get you definitely get that. I've worked with a finance person who basically couldn't use Excel, and watching them literally
that's
peck the
fail.
keyboard with their fingers.
That's day one of finance school, isn't it?
Every copy was like, click on the cell, edit, copy, click on the other cell, edit, paste. Like, learn a shortcut. Please learn a shortcut.
That's not good. Let's not name that person for fear they'll never work again in finance. Okay, so that was really great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for sharing all those insights with us. I think that was really valuable. Okay, so having established that you're a very capable, experienced leader, got lots of successes, lots of experience on your shoulders, but we like to give our listeners a little bit of, warts and all here. So can you tell us about something that maybe hasn't panned out exactly as you hoped it could be, something that you really struggled with, had to get to grips with? We'd love to hear how you recovered from it and what you learned from it.
There's two things. I think two things on this front. One is a very technical thing, which was one of my previous roles. For whatever reason, I decided it was a good idea to connect my IDE to the production database. Now, it was relatively early in my career I did this in order to debug a production issue. I would not advise anyone to do this at all.
Look down the camera and tell them not to do it, Steve.
Do not do it. Do not. I've only once subsequently moved connected to a pre-production environment to do something, but very, very carefully. But I learned a lesson from it. Mostly because what I then did was forget that I'd connected it to the database and run an integration test, which its first step was to delete the contents of the database. So I wiped the whole of production. That was an interesting period of time because it was production. I then had to it was only a small number of people in the company. I was basically having to rapidly unpick that problem, which I did. No loss of data, fortunately, in the end of it. The downtime on that system was not critical at the time, but the downtime of the system was not very long. It was about an hour or something like that with no loss of data. But I think one of the things, the key thing with that is I know that mistakes get made. Like, it's not... particularly when you're under pressure, particularly when you're doing things. And for me, that really was a learning exercise. It was a painful learning exercise, but it was like, and I knew not to do it, but I did it anyway, and then went, oh, that was a really bad idea.
And have you remembered to carry that forward as a leader now, to sort of almost forgive the people who make those mistakes?
Absolutely. Well, that's the main thing. It's like, firstly, there's a bit of humility there. That I know I've done it. I'm happy to tell people I've done it and that I learned from it, and I know that someone's going to make the same mistake. And one of the main things is not to then sit there. I didn't get berated for that. I didn't get completely like dragged. Right, that's it. Why have you done this? This is terrible. Why? It was like, okay, you've learned a lesson. But also, I want if somebody else does something that's a mistake, and they do happen, what are we going to do to solve that problem? But also, it helps to give you a context about how you might prepare for that inevitability, that someone is going to mess up at some point, and how are you going to plan for that?
So lessons of how to avoid, that's always useful, but also, as you say, that little bit of humility in you as a leader, that when somebody inevitably does, remember that you were once in that seat as well.
I think the other thing that was more of a, I talked about that company that I first worked for, and when I left there, I was absolutely adamant at that point that I wanted to be a CTO. I was in my mid-20s. I was totally convinced I want to be a CTO. I want to be a CTO. And I remember going to my the second company I worked for and talking to the then CIO, and there was no CTO at that organization. There was lots of very technical people, but there was no CTO certainly at that point. And I talked to him, and he was saying, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a CTO, and he said, oh, you're not a CTO here. We don't need a CTO. And I remember being incredibly frustrated by that. I actually felt quite angry. I can remember the feeling of that, being irritated about that, and I didn't flounce out of the office or start throwing furniture around or anything like that. Internally, I was very frustrated about that, and it took a conversation with my girlfriend then, but now my wife, to have a conversation with her, and she was like, "But one of the person said to me, one of the phrases that came out was you lack some ambition." And I was like, I do have ambition. I want to be a CTO. And my wife said to me, that's not ambition. Ambition is not the desire to want something. Ambition has to be combined with actually doing something. What is your plan to go and do that? The other thing was, I didn't really understand what a CTO was. I genuinely, looking back now, I was young. I thought I was an adult in many respects, but I didn't have enough experience. I thought it was the most technical person in the room. Therefore, that's what I want to be. I want to be in charge. I want to be bossing people around. I want people doing what I want to do. What I tell them, because I'm the smartest guy in the room. It's not that. It's never that. And if that's what you think you're going to get out of it, you're going to be a terrible CTO. You're going to be a terrible leader at that point when you get to that point.
I think you've just taught us two very valuable things which our listeners should really hook into. One is pretty much always listen to your future wife.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a good piece of advice for anybody. But secondly, I think this is almost the key thing that we're trying to get across to our audience, is what it really means to be a CTO. And it just won't mean what you think it is when you're 22, 24, 25, the cleverest person in the room. Technically, that's not good enough, right? You know, and I like your wife's definition of ambition. I think that's really smart and really clever. Maybe we should have her on the podcast. Okay. All right. Well, listen, thank you for sharing that vulnerability with us. I think that's hopefully something that our listeners can really tune into. So we had a great time talking to Steve today. We found out lots and lots about how you become a CTO, and really quite unusually to be in a startup and then a scale up and then effectively an enterprise. It was really interesting that Steve reflected on, he wasn't quite sure when that happened, what the different stages there. And when you're in the fire, when you're doing everything, I guess that is true. You sort of just one day wake up and you're a large organization. Really interesting that Steve had to learn and almost forced himself into positions where he had to know and learn stuff and take on stuff. His point about the compliance team and that being something over there. I think if you want to be an enterprise CTO, or even just a scale-up CTO covering lots and lots, you do have to know about lots and lots of parts of the organization. So get those learning skills on. Be interested in everything going on around you, not just the tech. Now, Steve is a tech, and it's clearly a great passion of his, and so it's fine to be a technical CTO. We probably both agree that you need some technical grounding. I hope, because I'm not the cleverest CTO in the room, that you don't need to be the best technologist to lead that team, but your team will want to know that you understand what they're about. And then flipping over to talking to your non-technical colleagues, you need to be able to translate that. And Steve was very clear about, taking the time to be able to do that and bringing people on the journey, but without stepping down into the IT fixer role. I think that's something that's really critical. It was really good to hear Steve's take on AI and other technologies. I think, actually we could have applied that to any new technology over the last 20 years that's come in. We all get a little bit overexcited, and then we have to rationalize that down to, well, what do we need this for? Is it meaningful and purposeful? I didn't hear anything from Steve suggesting that AI is going to be the death knell of all engineers out there. So I think we'll probably live on that for a little while. And then finally, Steve took us through, an experience that he'd had where he'd made a mistake, a very practical mistake himself earlier in his career. But what was great about the example was that it took Steve forward in the rest of his career and when he became a leader. So he would have some empathy, maybe a little bit of sympathy even, when people inevitably make those mistakes at time, and how not just to prevent them if you can in your organization structure and processes and the rigor that you put around everything you do, but also just to have that kind of understanding of the humanity side of it. And I think that's something, another skill set that you really need to as a technology leader or any kind of leader, just be able to build up your empathy skills there. So I think it was really, really interesting to hear all those things from Steve. Thank you for that, Steve. Hopefully that was a good summary of our conversation. What's your key takeaway for our audience?
I mean, it's pretty much, you covered a lot of it anyway in your wrap up there. But I think without a doubt, get involved with the organisation, get embedded in it, understand, get out of your comfort zone. Don't fall back on the technology as I could have done. Get involved in that and understand what the business is delivering, understand the problems that are in there, and listen to what people are saying, and don't shortcut that and think, well, okay, I've understood this now, so I'm going to walk away. And I think a lot of technologists particularly suffer from that. Oh, I've got that, right, okay, I'm moving on. They want to, it's like, no, you actually have to go through the iteration with people and talk to them about it.
Yeah, my favourite phrase there is hone your craft, stick with it, learn everything you can about it. I think that some of our listeners will be like, well, it's okay for Steve to say that, but how do I practically do that? I think curiosity is the key point there, right? Just look left a bit, look right a bit. What are other people doing, and show interest in that. People generally want to tell you what they're doing, right? They're generally often quite proud of what they're doing. So, there's always that angle, but looking for that, I think that's a really, really sensible piece of advice. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much for your time today, Steve. It's been a really interesting chat. And hopefully we'll see all of you on our next Through the CTO Lens podcast. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. So there we have it, folks. Another podcast wrapped up, and now would be a great chance for me to tell you about what we have coming up at London Tech Leaders. On October the 7th, 8th, we have our 2-day annual conference where you can see me and a few of the guests of the podcast discussing leadership-focused topics, such as harmonious versus high-performing teams, discussing whether technology leaders should build or buy, and also you might find a debate or two about the collapsing role of the C-suite.